Alright guys, welcome back to our fun news, and after a woeful start to the season for Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton, former world champion with Mercedes Nico Rosberg believes that tensions are seriously rising internally and that Toto Wolff was actually very frustrated at what Lewis Hamilton had to say for the team during their confrontation after qualifying in Imola. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Lots to dive into today, loads of updates. Firstly, McLaren, they're currently leading the fastest pit stop standings this year. Red Bull were close in Imola, but still, Ferrari over the course of the season, the fastest pit stop championship standings, they're right up there. Mercedes have been pretty woeful so far, not going to lie. If Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton had a better pit stop in Imola, could have been a very different race if you got ahead of the few drivers and didn't lose out about 3 places based on that poor pit stop that he did indeed have. Talk about Bottas here in a second though, because there was definitely some tradition going on with him having a bad pit stop, but it will recovered very nicely. Sprint races are coming back in force next season, going up to 6, it does indeed seem. Now, the F1 teams have agreed they want to do it to 6, but the FIA have said that actually that takes more resources from the FIA to pull this off, right? They need like the staffing and all this type of stuff to do it over all the different days. Therefore, they've said, look, we're actually not going to do this yet. Ben Sulayem, actually, the FIA president effectively says, look, we actually don't want to, we want more money effectively. The FIA is still evaluating the impact of this proposal on its trackside operations and personnel, effectively saying, look, we need like more money if we want to do this. So the F1 teams are going to have to pay us more cash if we want to actually do more sprint races. So that seemingly is the only thing holding them up. The teams don't seem to be too happy about this, maybe understandably so, but they're saying, look, it's just for operational reasons. Like, yes, we already get quite a lot of money from the teams anyway. I think they get like 40 mil a year or something. They want a little bit more than that for the extra races that they're going to have to do with the sprint races, right? So if the teams want to get on board, they're going to have to pay up effectively. We'll see if that goes through. You'd imagine it would be 6 sprint races, it seems, next season. We talked about some of the implications of that yesterday. This also, just to mention real quick, the helmets, the the cameras in the helmets have been, we've seen it on Alonso, Charles Leclerc, maybe a couple of other drivers here or there throughout the last year or so, really. Those look very good. Now, from 2023, the technical regulations will include the fact that they're going to mandate the use of these helmet cameras. So every driver on the grid will have these helmet cameras installed. That's really cool. Of course, they look something like this. Well, this is how they looked back in the day. You can see on George Russell's helmet right here, just this little eyepiece here, just to the left of his eye. That's where the camera is, right? So you get some pretty good quality pictures as well. So that's going to come to all drivers next year. One of the best shots we honestly have of these cars going around the track. Crazy how little visibility they have, right, when you see these helmet camera onboards. But it definitely gives you one of the craziest views of the race from their perspective. Now, speaking of changes to regulations, Adam Cooper also says the following: the 2026 regulations, the next time there's going to be a major shift, really. They're going to maintain and improve on recent lessons learned about close racing and cars being able to follow one another, reducing car dimensions, reducing or containing car mass. So this seems to be their main principles. Obviously, the racing has got better this year to some degree. We have certainly seen, even then without DRS, still overtaking seems pretty tough on some tracks, as of course we most recently saw in Imola. But yeah, one of the big complaints really has been the size of these cars and the weight of these cars. They're somewhat sluggish, especially fully loaded up on fuel, like 900 kgs, much heavier than they used to be a few years ago. Yes, safety is a consideration, and a very valuable one at that, is of course included there to some degree. If you want to reduce the weight, you're going to have to lose something or another. But that is going to be the plan, to make the cars smaller and lighter, but of course they want to maintain the safety. So they have to think about that one, because the last few years, Monaco's been, even more dull than it used to be, just because the cars are so big, you can't overtake anyone, right? The other part of it, as he points out, from 2026, the FA also wants to have significantly reduced drag and improve sustainability and efficiency to complement the PU characteristics. I believe they want to go to like 100% sustainable fuel. That's going to be interesting. Continue the path towards standardization or simplification of strategically selected components for cost-cutting purposes. So a few things they're looking to do, but again, smaller cars, lighter cars, and changes to the PUs as well. Of course, it's a long way away, but maybe it'll come up sooner than we think. Who knows? This just to mention then. So Alfa Romeo, of course, a phenomenal weekend for them, with Bottas all the way up to P6. This is their best result since 2019 Brazil, when Kimi Raikkonen got 4th. Of course, another Finnish driver. But yeah, P5 was incredible. He could have got P4 if he'd have managed to get George Russell at the end. And just looking at this, I thought it was kind of incredible that Angry Dino puts here on the Reddit. Red Bull, of course, were the fastest pace on the medium tyre. The Ferrari about 3/10 back, I guess, of Charles Leclerc. Of course, his Sainz was out of the race. Then the fastest pace we saw in terms of like pure lap pace was the Alfa Romeo. Of course, couldn't get past Russell at the end, but he was only 6/10 off what the Red Bull was doing. The McLaren was faster than the Mercedes. Of course, these are Russell's times, I guess, not Hamilton's, because he was stuck all the way further back here behind the Williams effectively, and Albon, and then of course Gasly behind him. But yeah, the Alfa Romeo was the 3rd quickest car this weekend on medium tyre pace, and these cars obviously did like 40 laps on those mediums towards the end. So like, definitely very interesting stuff. Then Bottas, of course, was in Mercedes last year. Russell's now taken a seat. He says the following: I'd never expected it to be that tricky for them to deal and figure out this new car. And the Alfa looks really poised, looks very good, looks very quick in a straight line. The Ferrari engine seem really helping. It's certainly good to see for them, but not so good to see at all for the Mercedes guys. And Rosberg, of course, a teammate of Lewis Hamilton when he won won the World Championship back in 2016 and then retired. Certainly the relationship between the two of these guys was, well, fractured at best, let's just say. They definitely, weren't too fond of each other for part of their era together. And when Rosberg did decide to step away at the top, Hamilton had a few words to be like, okay, I've won all these championships, and maybe Rosberg just doesn't think he's got more in him, but I certainly do. So, there was all this stuff between them. And I'm sure maybe Rosberg, there's a part of him that's looking at the difficult times Hamilton's having, because, Hamilton's been pretty much, invincible for the last 8 years or so, barely making any mistakes, just winning absolutely everything. It's obviously been a long time since people can actually go in on him and criticize him. Now he's in a bit of a slump, right? So maybe Rosberg's making the most of his opportunity in a sense, but he's also making some points which might be grounded in reality as well, saying that the tension is rising over there at Mercedes. Of course, there's some concerns. Is Hamilton just going to step away in the middle of the year? Is he going to wait to the end of the year? What's going on? He said that he wants to kind of ride it out, but if they don't produce a car that he believes is going to be capable of winning anything this season or the next, then is there really a reason to stick around? Maybe he's looking at Alonso though and thinking, okay, well, Alonso's a few years older than me, it's still very competitive. Who knows what's going to happen? But internally, of course, when you've won everything for years, it's never going to be easy. And this is what Rosberg has to say. It was tough to see Lewis in that state. He's really down. That's understandable. It's a long season. They are nowhere though with that car. They're not going to be able to fight for race wins. I think he'll manage. He's really a fighter. And remember, there's always that thing that he still wants to beat his teammate. That's really important to him. With George performing so well, that could be his biggest motivator for Lewis to just keep going and keep fighting, guys. So that's the thing. George is doing very well. I'm sure there is going to be some tension there to a degree, because George is getting all the spotlight right now. Hamilton most certainly isn't. After Bahrain, it seemed to be okay. It was going to be number one, number two driver type thing. Now it's very much a different story, with him being the most consistent driver on the grid, that being George Russell, at least in terms of race placings. And this is actually what he had to say. So we remember, I think it was after qualifying, where Hamilton obviously was not a happy man after he came out that car after P14 or whatever he qualified in for the sprint race. And there was clearly a bit of a heated exchange there between Lewis and of course Toto Wolff. Now, what exactly was going on there? Whether Toto was angry at Lewis for something, whether Lewis was angry at Toto and the team for something they did, who knows? But Rosberg's trying to read into this and say, look, it was a tough situation. He's won a race in every single year of his career. Might be the year that he can't win anymore. You can see how the tension is rising. We saw how Toto, in my view, that being Rosberg's view, was angry at Lewis after qualifying because maybe Lewis criticised the team a bit too harshly over the team internal radio about something they might have done. The tension's rising, that's natural. Lewis will obviously start to show these emotions a little bit with the experience he has. I think he'll eventually manage to keep those emotions under control. So interesting stuff. But I suppose it is to be expected when you've won everything and now things aren't going so well, 4 races in a row where things have been pretty tragic for Lewis Hamilton and the Mercedes team in general. Tensions are going to rise, and not just because the team is underperforming, but also because George Russell's putting in good performances week in, week out in this car. Hamilton's seriously in a slump, right? It's not like he's forgotten how to drive, but understandably, there's going to be some tensions there between Hamilton, the team, and everything. And who knows how they might kick off over coming races, because it doesn't seem like he's going to turn up to Miami and start dominating once again, to be perfectly honest. Of course, as we said, his teammate George Russell, most consistent driver on the grid, P4, P5, P3, P4, very impressive in the Mercedes, pretty much where this car is right now. Of course, that's some fortunate results with Sainz and Leclerc falling off in the race at Imola, and then the Red Bulls retiring in earlier races, this type of stuff. But still, every single weekend he's been able to maximise his positions, and that's the thing. Hamilton obviously got unlucky this past weekend, getting stuck behind the DRS train that he did, getting bad timing when the DRS was activated, and also the bad pit stop. But if you put in a better qualifying performance on Friday, the same thing you could also say in Saudi Arabia right now. It's kind of been 2 times that happens where he was significantly back on his teammates, and therefore that puts him in a real tough spot for the race. And yes, some luck necessarily didn't go his way, but if he was in Russell's position, then he would have been in a much more favourable position to actually get a decent result out of the car that obviously isn't performing well right now. So I'm sure tensions are going to be rising. This is a pretty interesting stat actually as well here from F1 Stats Guru. This is the entirety of the turbo hybrid era. Only twice when Hamilton has finished a race has he not been in the top 10. That was Baku 2021 right after the magic brakes thing. All of these races, he was always at very least in the top 10, and then Imola 2022 right was the most recent one. So crazy stuff. Don't imagine it's going to continue for too much longer, but well, honestly, who knows at this point with the way this Mercedes is, and also some of the struggles with this Mercedes, especially in qualifying, right, which is really where it sets themselves up for bad weekends. So that is the real issue. They might have the race pace, as seemingly they do based on that graph we looked at earlier, but they're not able to translate it into anything because the straight line speed isn't there on difficult tracks to overtake Imola. And of course there was also unlucky in a way that the fact that it was raining and Hamilton couldn't really go over the edge in terms of there was only really one dry line on the straight properly, so he couldn't really pull out and use the entire track because you can't really brake on the wet part of the track. So if anything, the rain actually made the race worse on Sunday than it might have been otherwise. A shame it didn't rain towards the end. That would have been very spicy. But we can hope for one of the other races this season. And just to mention this actually as well before we finish out, the entire field have scored points in 2022 this year, with the exception of 2 drivers, Mick Schumacher and Nicholas Latifi. Rather interesting. Latifi as expected, of course, but Albon got a good point and he even came 11th right here in Imola. That was a very impressive drive from him in a car that clearly was much slower than the two guys behind him. But Schumacher to me is the interesting one, right? Because Magnussen has been putting up a fair few points this year for Haas so far. Schumacher's had a pretty tough time. Like, we'll just have to see how this goes for Mick, right? Because in the future, people are thinking, okay, could Schumacher 2 be a thing over at Ferrari? Is that the direction they want to go in? Like, well, who knows if that's actually going to be the case, right? If this continues, because Schumacher's pretty much been outclassed so far by Magnussen, a guy that's just come back here, like, isn't even really race fit, to be honest, because, like, he was saying his neck wasn't really ready to go, and, like, he wasn't fully trained up to be an F1 driver again with the G-forces that they experience, and he's still outperforming and outclassing Mick Schumacher on a week-by-week basis, right? So there's definitely a lot to be said about that. Like, obviously, look, he's got time, and of course, Sainz's seat isn't going to be available for a couple of years, but I'm sure Ferrari are keeping tabs on what Mick Schumacher's doing, and by the end of this year and next year, he's going to have to be outperforming and outracing Magnussen if he wants to shot to move up the teams. But very much enjoyed your thoughts and all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always, take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.